Morning, if you're just joining us. Just going to wait a minute or two just to allow everyone to get in and get settled and get connected. Feel free to get your cameras switched on so we can see everyone's faces. Morning. See more and more people coming in now. Morning, if you're just coming in. Right, good morning, everybody. We'll make a start. It's 2 minutes past 10. Welcome to today's session, Made in Manchester, a Young Professionals panel. I will be handing over to the chair of today's session, Laura Gillen, shortly. Just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. Please be aware the session is being recorded, and please ask any questions through the chat function at the bottom, and then hopefully if there's time at the end we might have a chance for you to open up your mics and we'll have a bit of live chat as well. Perhaps we'll just see how we get on for time. But before I hand over to Laura, I'm going to hand over to Claire Sofield, the Director of For Recruitment.
Hi everyone. So yeah, as Sean said, I'm Sales Director and co-founder of For Recruitment. We're sponsors of this morning's virtual event. I've also been a previous chair of Future Pro Manchester and a MiMA winner, albeit a few years ago, in the business development category. So when I thought about doing a few words this morning, it's hard to know where to start this year, really, isn't it? But February feels about 5 years ago when we had the MiMA Awards, and any kind of thoughts and memories of Jaeger bombs drunk and God knows what else. Again, a distant memory, but hopefully we'll be back next year. So I'm really glad that Future Pro have decided to do this virtual event this morning. I think positive stories and positive messages are important to kind of for people to keep at the forefront of their mind. So we've sponsored for the last few years. As a business, for us, kind of developing up and coming talent's really important. It is for our own team, but also as a company, we don't just place people in jobs, we really help them with their kind of personal development and decisions that they make. I wish I'd have known about Future Pro in my early to mid 20s. I'm not in my early to mid 20s anymore, believe it or not, but I do wish I'd have known about it. I probably started working with the wider Pro Manchester about 8 years ago. It's really helped me develop my network, enhance certain skill sets, and kind of push me to do things that I've not done before. So if people are listening today and have done bits and bobs, but maybe haven't kind of attended all the events, I'd really recommend that you do that. I think kind of finally, just to end on a note, times are uncertain at the moment, and if we all had a crystal ball for the next 6 to 12 months, we'd be in a great position. But equally, I think now is not the time to kind of pause on your own personal development. I've spoken to so many people and businesses that have used the last kind of 6 months to reflect on what they want and their own kind of personal and business goals. So my advice is, don't kind of hibernate at the moment. Absolutely kind of crack on and pursue those goals, and part of that is getting involved in organisations like Future Pro Manchester and the MiMA Awards. So hopefully you'll hear some really kind of inspiring stories today from the panellists, which will encourage you to kind of enter next year's awards. So I'll pass over, I think, to Laura now, who's going to start the panel session.
Thanks, Claire. That was really helpful. I'll quickly introduce the speakers on our panel this morning. We've got Alison Loveday from Kennedy's. She's judged MiMA on numerous occasions. We've got Max Whiteley from UHY Hacker Young, and he won Apprentice of the Year at MiMA 2020. And Harry Thompson from DLA Piper, and he won Graduate of the Year and the Rising Star Award at MiMA 2020. for those that don't know, the Rising Star Award is sort of picked from all of the winners from all of the categories, and it sort of recognises the sort of top individual that everybody saw. So it is really a massive achievement. MiMA 2021 is going to be quite different for obvious reasons. It's going to be an entirely virtual event this year. We've got 2 new categories, Manager of the Year and Team of the Year, which I think is going to be really nice to be able to recognise, you know, a group of people, not just individuals. In terms of very basic information, the entries close on the 15th of November. Shortlist will be announced on the 7th of December, and the awards are due to take place on the 4th of February, with interviews on the 7th of January. I think it might be the 8th of January. So in terms of how it all works, general process is that you submit a written entry, which is judged by a panel of people. The top, the highest scoring person and people go through to the shortlist, and that then goes to an interview, which is usually a panel of about 3 judges. This year the interviews will be via Zoom or Teams rather than in person. And I know that Harry did his interview Max did his interview by Zoom last year, so I will ask him a few questions about that when we get onto it. But in terms of starting from the beginning, to Harry and Max, probably in the first instance, Harry, I'll go to you first. Why did you apply last year? What made you think this is something that I think will be sort of beneficial to me? And what was the process for you internally for that to happen?
Thanks very much for introducing me, Laura, and hi everyone, welcome to the call. So yeah, in terms of just dealing with the first point, so why I applied, I think it was coming up to around kind of this time last year, so sort of October, November. I'd been away in London for a few months on a secondment with the firm, and I'd come back to the office in Manchester and kind of wasn't really considering any awards categories or anything like that. And it was actually an internal email from our marketing team that was circulated around kind of the whole office, just saying that this was going on. Everyone has membership at DLA to Pro Manchester and to the events, and sort of encouraging anyone to consider applying. And I think I didn't think there'd be a category that would fit for someone kind of so early on in my career. I just finished my training contract at DLA and was just moving into kind of the first couple of months of qualified life. And I think because of that, I was slightly hesitant to put myself forward. But actually, when I saw the Graduate of the Year category, and that was for anyone who was either undertaking a graduate scheme or had finished one within the last 12 months, that put me kind of firmly in that bracket. And I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to kind of put myself out there and just sort of test the waters more than anything. So I think that was why I applied. And then the process, I've sort of alluded to it slightly there, but it was just a case of raising it with my line manager, who at the time was Stuart, who's head of the department, and just sitting down with him, having a quick chat and saying, I've seen this come across the desk. I'd like to put myself forward. Is that something that you'd support? And can I kind of go about sort of drawing up my application form and then sort of putting it in front of you and seeing what you think and seeing if you have any comments? And he was fully supportive, and that was kind of what led to the actual application being made and the nomination coming from the department.
Great. And Max, what was the experience like for you? What was your sort of decision-making process behind it?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Max Whiteley and I work for UHY Hacker Young in Manchester City Centre. Yeah, I was lucky to win Apprentice of the Year last year. My process was quite similar to Harry's. It was recommended by marketing team and came across my desk, and my manager wanted to put me forward for it. As you can imagine, there's not too many accountants who are too great with interviewing and speaking. I'm sort of more the extrovert side of accountancy. So I just put forward an application myself, wrote it myself, and then sort of upon writing it, sort of went over it then with my manager and the head of marketing, who just happened to be on a 2.5-hour train journey home with me from London after a course. So I timed that quite nicely. So yeah, I spent quite a long time on the application form, making sure I'd covered everything. sort of gone beyond the basics with that. So yeah, so that's sort of how I sort of went forward and applied for it, and then sort of entered MiMA, was shortlisted, and then found out obviously I was going to go through to the interview process. From there, I actually had a selection of partners at my firm who interviewed me prior to my MiMA interview to sort of give me a sort of a taster session of what it was to expect and just sort of break down that initial fear of having an interview. And then, yeah, I really think that helped, you know, moving on to the next stage.
Yeah. Just going back to the submissions quickly, Alison, what do you think makes a submission stand out? 'Cause it's quite difficult for people to get over everything, sort of, you know, answering a few questions on a written form.
It is, and I think you've really got to find a way of bringing your personality out somehow on paper, which I appreciate is not an easy task, but everybody's probably tried to do that to some extent when pulling, for example, CVs together. It's always the covering letter that tends to, I think, certainly catch my eye. So I think the other thing I would say is, I think, Max, you said you'd taken quite a lot of time over it. I think it's important that you do. You probably need to do a number of drafts, and I would focus on the things that are not standard. So, you know, people will expect you to have, you know, certain levels of qualification and things like that. It's not that that's going to, I think, make the difference. It will be, you know, what you're doing that stands out in your firm, what additional steps you've taken, how you've helped colleagues, maybe how you're engaging with the community. So I think it's all the extra things that you need to focus on and treat them at least as importantly as maybe sort of bringing out the skills of the category that you're in.
Mm. How did you both find it, Harry and Max, doing the written submission? Would you say it's more difficult to come across in that compared to the interview? What would you say you found more challenging?
I'll go first with this one, if that's right, Max. So I think I found the written part, more tricky in the sense that all the questions are quite short. So, I mean, as anyone who's made any kind of job application knows, you always end up writing too much and then kind of having to cut it down and sort of feel like you're removing things that you want to say. So I think that was quite a difficult process, and as Alison alluded to, that meant kind of a couple of rounds of drafts really. So to kind of work out exactly what were the key points that I wanted to make, what were the things that were a differentiating factor for me as opposed to somebody else, and that would allow me to kind of set them out. And I think on that point, one thing that I looked at was I kind of viewed the written application, rather than it being sort of the stage, I viewed it as the first stage to the interview. So I was very aware that I wanted to allude to things and kind of raise things in that written application, but that I wouldn't need to expand on them too much at that stage, because as long as that impressed enough, that would then give me the opportunity to expand on things at an interview and to kind of discuss them more in my own words in a more kind of natural setting there. So I think my focus and my advice for the written application would be to focus on kind of having enough breadth and alluding to enough things that you've done and things that you think sets yourself apart, without feeling like you have to go into unnecessary detail, because you'll get that opportunity down the line kind of if you get to that stage.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I would agree. Sort of building on what Alison was saying, definitely got to go beyond the basics. Don't just write sort of, as say me as an accountant, producing a set of accounts and saving clients tax is not really something that's unexpected from an accountant. So have to sort of go beyond that. Sort of, I try to start every point with the sort of the impact and the why, what it is, instead of saying, you know, I implement technology in clients' firms. I'd start with, I've saved one of my clients his weekends, and he's got his weekends back, sort of hit him with the impact, and then sort of, so you're not building up and wasting a lot of the entry form with sort of jargon and sort of nothingness really. Another thing I would say would try and sort of back it up with some sort of stats, try and have some sort of metrics to what it is that you've done and how that sort of affected you and the firm or your clients. So for example, time saved, new work won, and so on. And yeah, and then my final point would be maybe try and attach some case studies. It's all right, you sort of backing yourself up and saying how well you've done, but I think it's quite a powerful standpoint to come and sort of give maybe a review from a client or from a member of your team, saying, you know, they're backing up sort of what it is you're saying. So yeah, that would be my tips. And review. Make sure that everything you form is sort of professionally set out, and yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice. Alison, do you agree in terms of attaching case studies and anything that clients are able to say in terms of that being beneficial to an application?
I think it is, but there's obviously a limit as to how much you can enclose. So I think if they're sort of to the point and they illustrate something that's being said in the application, yes. But I think it's about piquing people's interest. So as Harry said, you sort of leave the judges thinking, oh, I want to know more about that. That sounds interesting, and then you want to interview them. So I think that's the clever bit. And I do think, you know, as Max has said, having talking just very broadly and very generally is not going to be helpful. So if you can hone in on a few specific things, give good examples, I think the impact on business and or the impact on colleagues, or as I said before, the impact maybe in your community, all of those things, you know, do stand out and can be demonstrated. So it's worth giving some thought to how you can best bring that to life.
Great. Going to move on to the interview process. Alison, what are you looking for when you interview people? I know it's difficult because it probably changes from category to category, but what kind of things stand out for judges?
So when I've done the judging, I've always been in a group of 3. We've typically allowed each candidate to come in and just get settled, and to allow them to get settled, we've just asked them to talk just a little bit about themselves and their application, and then we've gone into some questions, and we've tended to ask the same questions to each candidate, because I think that's fairer and everybody gets that opportunity to shine, if you like. So I think in terms of what stands out is people who are genuinely authentic and passionate about what they do. I think that really shines out with the right interviewee. As I said, I have had some experience where people have come in and just talked about their role, just talked about their job. So for Max, that would be, you know, not all the intricacies of accounting, but, you know, just talking about the job, and that is not going to win you any award. So I would veer away from that.
Max, you said that you'd had some prep, you'd sat down with some colleagues and done some mock interviews. Was there anything else that you did, and did you find it beneficial to do those mock interviews?
Yeah, so as we touched on earlier, I was actually away on holiday at the time of the interview, so I never actually got to sit in front of you guys, but I remember seeing Alison through the camera. So I think I would prefer to be in person, but I think I was managed to get myself across sort of passionately enough over Zoom. The mock interviews definitely helped. Just gets you past that sort of sticking point of, oh, I didn't know what to say then. Next time I know that if that question was to come up, how I would answer it. I would just say make sure you know your application form inside out, and make sure you can sort of adapt any question that's asked to your entry form as such. I remember thinking one question I got asked was, what was my claim to fame? I was an accountant in Manchester, and I just had to sort of on the spot, you know, think of a point that was in my application form and sort of adapt it to the question, because the questions aren't going to be as structured as what do you do, how do you add value, name me a time you've worked well in a team. Yeah. There's going to be something in there that sort of makes you think on the spot. So just make sure that you know everything inside out and you're comfortable talking about yourself. And yeah, if you don't want to sit in front of a manager or partner, then maybe just film yourself and talk into a camera.
Yeah, that's good advice actually. Harry, what did you do sort of leading up to your interview?
So similar to Max, I didn't have any mock interviews, which is probably an oversight on my part. But I did sit down with a couple of my kind of peers at the time and just talk through kind of my application. So they were actually people who proofread my application for me before we submitted it. So they had been kind of familiar with it in that early stage process, and it allowed me to then come back to them once I knew I'd been shortlisted and had an interview, and just kind of sit down with them for 10-15 minutes over a coffee and have a quick chat about it and how I was feeling. And then I think in terms of, because Max has covered kind of what I'd say the run up to the actual interview itself, I'd say kind of in the immediate space before, so sort of 24 hours or even 3 or 4 hours before, my focus for any interview, but particularly for this one where I knew it would be a panel, so it was going to be quite a daunting experience, was just to try and relax as much as possible. So I think Max's advice on knowing your application inside out, knowing your CV inside out, is great advice. And that was all I kind of focused on, was just no one knows you better than yourself. So just focus on knowing you, and then try and just get yourself to that state where you're relaxed enough that you can kind of synthesize ideas and come up with points based on your own experience quickly and efficiently, and then put them across coherently to the interviewing panel. And I think that's would be my best advice for any interview, but for this type of interview as well, where you've got multiple panelists, you're going to get some questions that are kind of slightly off the wall or different, or don't quite neatly line up with necessarily something you've done in the past, and you need to adapt your experience. And I think the most important thing is when you're in that pressured situation, that you try and find enough comfort internally as you can. And if that means going to the gym in the morning and kind of de-stressing, or going for a walk, or listening to an audiobook, whatever it is that works for you, but do that kind of in the immediate run up to it, and it'll kind of pay dividends through the actual interview itself.
Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. And is there anything that either of you wish you'd done differently leading up to your interviews, or do you feel that you were sort of as prepped as you could be, with the benefit of hindsight? Harry, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I think so having heard what Max said, and I think it's great advice, I think I probably would have done kind of a formal structured mock interview. Maybe even if possible, like Max said, if you're a bit daunted by perhaps approaching a manager in your team or a partner, maybe just with a couple of your peers. So for me, that would have been trainees or NQs, people that I was kind of really familiar with and kind of more on a level playing field with. And maybe just sit down with them and just ask them for 10 minutes, and having that experience of having to address multiple people. Because I think it's quite rare in our jobs that you have to do that, where you're having to be fully in the hot seat and kind of jump between different people and kind of hold their gaze at the same time. And that can take a bit of practice. So I think that would have been, with hindsight, if I was preparing again for a submission, that's probably what I'd look to do, is sit down with 2, if 3 people if possible, but 2 certainly, and then practice having to address both of them at the same time, so that you're not kind of falling into that trap of just addressing the person who's asked the question, or just kind of making eye contact with one but excluding the other 2.
Yeah, I would say sort of similar points to Harry. The only thing I would probably, as I said, I was quite well prepared. I sort of put quite a lot of time into that. I probably would try and have some points for the interview that weren't sort of on my entry form initially, just because the people in that room have already read your sort of application form, and if you can bring something else sort of to freshen up the points in their mind, then that might be sort of a good point to put across.
Great. Alison, do you have any advice for people doing these interviews, particularly if this year they're going to be via Zoom? It can be a bit more difficult to sort of make eye contact with people properly over Zoom. I find myself constantly looking at the person's image on the screen rather than actually looking at the camera. So then you're not really making eye contact. Do you have any advice as to how people can try and get over that for this year's entries?
I'm probably not the person to advise on Zoom, I have to say. I think we're all learning on that.
Yeah.
I think my biggest thing is that you've probably got a little bit more time than you think. So if a question, certainly I would say all of the interview panels that I've done, we want to get the best out of people. So we're not asking tricky questions or trying to catch people out. It really is to try and give people the opportunity to shine. But if a question is asked that you weren't quite expecting, then everybody that applies and has got through to the interview stage will be bright, intelligent, all capable of thinking on their feet, and just slow things down whilst you consider your answer. And if you actually need to say, look, just give me a sec while I think about that, that's no problem, you know. So I'd say just be kind to yourself and give yourself a bit more time. And as for Zoom, I think I would say it would definitely be worth doing some prep, just making sure that the space that you've got is going to be quiet, that you've got the right tech. If you need to wear headphones, you're comfortable with them, and that nothing extraneous like that is going to put you off.
Yeah.
And then I think having some time with somebody to interview you and or recording yourself, I think would make you feel more comfortable on the day. And that's what it's about. It's about being able to just focus on the interview rather than nerves or, as I said, you know, anything technical getting in the way.
Yeah. So turning to sort of being shortlisted and winning, Max and Harry, you both won awards at MiMA 2020. What would you say the benefits have been for that? It's been quite an unusual year. We went into lockdown probably about 6 weeks after MiMA. Would you say it's helped you to stand out? Has it benefited you sort of throughout the course of this year since winning? Max, if we go to you first.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely benefited me for winning, both externally and internally. So externally, it's great for my personal brand, and it's great for my firm's personal brand from a sort of marketing and business development standpoint. Internally, as I sort of work for sort of a large UK-based corporate firm with like 19 offices, it's really helped me sort of build my brand within the firm and sort of been taken more seriously. And sort of, as you know, coming from as an apprentice within the firm, I'm now sort of, you know, moving up the ladder as more of a senior member of staff. So I definitely think winning the award has helped me and my firm massively over a time when there's not that much to shout about.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I'd echo what Max has just said there, and I think the key way that I'd sort of answer this question is that it can be split into internal and external. So on the internal side, you've got personally, individually, yourself. So winning an award at MiMA, kind of, it just gives you that sort of self-recognition, which is more valuable really than kind of any sort of form of external certification, because it just gives you more confidence in yourself to put yourself in a position that you might be more uncomfortable in, and it gives you that reassuredness that you know that you kind of deserve to be there, and you can kind of back yourself. And so I think it's really good for that. So you kind of have that internal side. Then, as Max said, you then have the internal side within your organization. So with DLA, we've got just in the UK, we've got 5 or 6 offices and over 1,500 lawyers kind of spread across those offices. So it's massive. But then as a firm ourselves, we're global and we're all over the world in kind of over 30 countries. So being noticed within an organization of that size is itself quite difficult, and particularly with kind of a trainee class, you'll have across the world around 100 trainees per year group, but 2 year groups at any one time. So that means there's 200 trainees kind of in circulation. So to kind of stand out within that, it's also quite a daunting task and can be quite difficult as well, particularly when people are in different offices and you maybe don't interact with people outside of your geographical location that much. So I think it's really important to try and put yourself out there with things that are going to differentiate you as you kind of approach qualification and then beyond. And I think an award like this early on in your career kind of helps to do that. It just helps to raise your profile, helps to let people in the firm know kind of who you are and put a face to a name. And then, you know, maybe it doesn't pay dividends immediately, but as kind of time goes on, it just means you're more and more familiar with people. And then, as Max kind of went on to at the end there, there's the external side as well. So there's getting yourself out there, building your own brand, whether it's virtually, so largely through LinkedIn or kind of other online webinars at the moment. But then as sort of we start to go back to a kind of more routine sort of way of networking and meeting people in person, again, it kind of helps you have the confidence to attend events and then to go along and actually make that first introduction. And I think it sort of opens those doors as well. So I think there's a few benefits. For me personally, the internal and the kind of intra-firm benefit has been really noticeable, but there's also been kind of some external pushes and motivators as well from winning the awards.
Oh, that's great. Sort of final question from me, and then we'll open up to questions from people watching. And it's a question to all of you. I'll go to Alison first. If there's anybody who's sort of sitting on the fence thinking, oh, I don't know whether I should apply, I don't know, what the benefit would be to me, what advice would you give somebody to encourage them to take that sort of plunge to make an application?
I think, having listened to Max and Harry, I would hope that everybody would recognise, there are real tangible benefits to making the application. And their personal profile, raising awareness within their own firms is key. But I think also, as Harry said, having a real sense of pride in yourself. So I would say just putting yourself forward is a massive step, and taking the time to answer the questions and deal with the application. You will come up with examples and find things out about yourself that you've really not really articulated. You've really read somewhere, but you've not really done that. And also you'll be reaching out maybe to managers and colleagues, asking for their thoughts, input, maybe clients if you're going for case studies, and you'll get a lot of positive endorsement, which I think with everything going on right now is probably even more important than ever. And so I just think that you've got nothing to lose. You really haven't. The fact that you put yourself forward, if you're not shortlisted or you're not the winner of the award, so what? I think you will get a lot out of the process itself.
Yeah, I agree.
Just further to, oh sorry, I was just
going to turn to you, Harry.
Okay, well, one thing to add to Alison's point is, I would really encourage everyone to kind of think hard about and to kind of make that step, because as well as the process of pulling it together, and as Alison said, that being kind of a really beneficial experience in itself, one of the things that as a younger candidate was slightly daunting was that MiMA and these awards are open to people up to the age of 35. And I think if you're starting out in industry, you might feel like, oh, that's, I'm 25, I'm 26. There's still a number of years to go. Maybe I'll apply when I'm 30. Maybe I'll just wait because I'll be up against people that are older and more experienced. But I'd really recommend not listening to that side of you. Kind of age is not relevant to this. If you keep putting it off, you'll probably end up and never making that application. So I think put yourself out there, go through the experience, and don't be kind of concerned about the fact that you're one of the younger candidates and that there might be people who've had more years, because then they've also had more time to do things. And so just because you've done less but you're younger, that means you've done more in the time that you've had. So I'd really kind of recommend considering and then making an application.
Max, do you have anything that you would add to what Alison and Harry have said?
Yeah, just echoing Harry and Alison. I just think the sort of benefits massively outweigh the sort of effort even needed to apply for the award. I think it's a few hours for the application form and it's a few hours for the interview. Then you can sit back and just let the judges make a choice on who's the winner. And obviously the benefits are massive. They don't just last for a matter of hours. They last, for a long time. It's on your sort of personal record, and it's built your personal brand. So yeah.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Does anybody watching have any questions that they'd like to put to anybody? Feel free to turn your mics on if anybody does have a question, or pop it in the chat.
I was going to say, guys, more than welcome to turn your cameras on, turn your microphones on at this point, and jump in with any questions. We've had one question which I have answered on the chat in regards to attaching additional documents. So I was just saying that the information provided on the application form is what's taken into account first and foremost. Adding additional evidence isn't a mandatory requirement by any means, but if anyone does have any supplementary evidence they want to send in, then they can send it to me directly at sean.gibb@promanchester.com, and that'll get submitted along with your entry to the judges at the time of judging.
Great. Well, if there are no specific questions from anybody at this stage, I'll just thank everybody for joining today, and thank you to our panel for giving some real insight. And I think we'll circulate something afterwards, just with some sort of key takeaway tips from what we've discussed today.
Yeah, we absolutely will. So yeah, if there is no other questions, as Laura says, all that remains is for me to thank all of our speakers today. Thank you to Claire, to Alison, to Harry, to Max, and of course to Laura for chairing. So thanks everyone, and good luck with your entry. Deadline, as Laura said, is 15th of November. So now's a good time to start working on your entry. Good luck.
Thanks.
Bye everyone.
Thanks, Sean. Bye, everyone.